Welcome to the Sage Solutions podcast, where we talk about all things personal growth, personal development, and becoming your best self. My name is David Sage, and I am a self-worth and confidence coach with Sage Coaching Solutions. As we've touched on in several other episodes, the holiday season can both be a great time of getting to see family members that we rarely ever get to see, of getting to spend a lot of time with your favorite people, and enjoy your favorite holiday traditions, meals, experiences, and give and get gifts. But the holidays can be a very bittersweet experience. While we talked about how maintaining discipline can be very tough around the holiday season because of the extra stress and pressure, and we also talked about how anxiety can spike for people around the holidays, and how anxiety affects all of us differently. But while pressure and stress and anxiety can all make the holidays a little bit harder on us, everyone at some point in time will experience loss and the grief that comes after. For many people, grief and the holidays are intimately linked, especially if you've had a loved one pass around the holiday season. So for today's episode about navigating grief around the holidays, I wanted to bring in an expert of experience, my wife, Hannah.
Hi, guys. Now, I'm definitely not what I would consider an expert on the subject of grief and loss, but unfortunately, I have firsthand experience over the tragedies of losing someone during the holidays. I lost my dad almost 7 years ago, right in the middle of the holiday season. Today, as we're recording this, we are recording on December 8th. We found out that my dad was going to die on December 1st, so 1 week prior to today. Then my dad died on the 15th of December, which is exactly 1 week from today in the future. Smack dab in the middle of feeling all of the waves of emotion and the feelings of loss and grief, and reliving some of those experiences.
And I just wanted to say, while I wasn't around to be a part of experiencing the loss of Hannah's father, because Hannah and I hadn't started dating yet at that point, which also means that, unfortunately, I never got the pleasure of meeting Hannah's father, Mark. I have seen the direct effects of how the grief of losing somebody incredibly important to you has affected your experience of the holidays, and how grief does play a big part in your experience of the holidays, in addition to the joy that you do feel, and it's really taught me a lot about how the holidays are a mixed bag. They can be very bittersweet for many individuals, and we often don't know who is feeling those mixed emotions. So it's important to be cognizant of the fact that anybody during this holiday season could be feeling these mixed emotions. So I don't want to get across that this is just about helping people who are feeling these emotions, but even if you're not currently experiencing these emotions during the holiday season, you might be one day, and you might have loved ones who are. So it's important to understand how they might be feeling. But before we get into it, our goal with this podcast is to share free, helpful tools with you and anyone you know who is looking to improve their life. So take action, subscribe, and share this podcast with them. Now, it's not as though I have no experience with loss or grief around the holidays. During the holidays, I miss my great-grandpa Joe, my Nana, and my other grandparents that I've lost. But for me, I felt the strongest grief the holiday season directly after those events happened. And while I occasionally feel a tinge of sadness when I think about it, for me, I'm at the point with those losses, they're far enough removed for me, that I mostly look back on happy memories. I think it would be helpful to start with a base understanding of what grief is, what it's not, how it affects people, and how it's tied to the holiday season. Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love. Earl Grolman. So what is grief? Grief is the emotional, physical, and psychological response to loss. It's often associated with death. Grief can occur after any major life change, such as the end of a relationship, a job loss, or even a significant lifestyle change. But often, the strongest form of grief is the loss of a loved one. It is unique to every person, and there's no right way to grieve. According to the Mayo Clinic, grief can manifest in many different ways, including sadness, anger, guilt, confusion, and even physical symptoms like fatigue or difficulty sleeping. What grief is not a sign of weakness or something to be fixed. It's a natural response to loss. Many people feel pressure to move on or get over it after a period of time, but this does a disservice to the grieving process. Grief is not linear and can reappear unexpectedly, especially during times like the holidays. A quote by Dr. Alan Wolfelt: "The pain of grief is just as much a part of life as the joy of love. It's all a part of the cycle of life." The holidays are often a time when people gather with family, reflect on the year, and celebrate together. For those who are grieving, these traditions can highlight the absence of loved ones, or bring painful reminders of lost relationships or unfulfilled hopes. The emphasis on togetherness can make the feelings of loneliness and loss more pronounced. A study published in Death Studies found that the holiday season significantly exacerbates feelings of grief, particularly for those mourning the death of a loved one, due to heightened social expectations and emotional triggers. The holidays are a reminder that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. While I still miss the grandparents that I've lost every holiday season, I can't say that the amount of grief that I feel colors the holiday season enough for me to really speak on this topic. Most of what I've learned about how grief affects the holidays is from the secondhand experience of going through the holidays with you. I think it would be really helpful if you shared some of your knowledge and experience surrounding the loss and how it affects the holidays for you.
Yeah, so I lost my dad when I was 24 years old, and my dad had just recently turned 51 when he passed. He battled intense cancer for 5 years. So we knew it was coming, but I think there's a lot of shock and denial in the very beginning stages of someone passing. It doesn't really feel real until it actually happens. And even afterwards, there is a shock in your system that I don't think I fully started processing the fact that he was gone until probably a couple months after, because it's just all about survival. So I just want to tell people who are going through things or feel guilty about that, because I worked through a lot of feelings of guilt, a feeling like I wasn't fully present as much as I could have been or should have been in the couple months prior to his passing and the couple months after his passing. But that's normal. Your body is going through a huge loss that you were not prepared for. Even if you felt like you had mentally and emotionally prepared for, you didn't. Not fully. So I just want to tell people that that's normal, especially during the holiday season. I find that the holiday season for me is filled with a lot of reminders of my dad. He loved the holidays, and we had a lot of traditions around him. But going back to what I was already saying, grief is normal. The process is normal. It's a normal response to a significant loss. And if the tables were turned and you found out that no one cried for you or missed you, that would be a deep cut. So knowing that you are mourning that person and that you miss them, in my opinion, grief is the healthiest. Grief is the healthiest response in that situation to show someone that you miss them. However, saying that it's normal, I don't want to minimize the fact that it is an extremely difficult process I don't want to minimize what anybody is going through.
And when anyone is feeling loss and grief, in addition to the extreme love that you're feeling for them and the feeling of loss, you're also feeling a loss of control. Your certainty is gone. You're feeling a loss of love from them. Many of our 6 human needs go completely haywire when somebody we love is no longer around.
Exactly. No one really prepares you for the secondary losses that come with losing someone. And what I mean by secondary losses, depending on the relationship and who the person was to you, you're losing a lot of different elements that come with that relationship, such as a spouse. It could be your plans for a retirement, plans to be grandparents with them, to have a life together, to grow old with each other. It could be a child, which I cannot even fathom the amount of pain that comes with losing a child. But there's a lot of other grief that comes with it. A lot of losses of environmental losses, status, alteration of relationships, all because of this death. And each has its own impact, and each loss needs to be mourned. Specifically for me, the secondary losses come and go. I kind of feel them as I'm experiencing life. So a lot of things feel bittersweet. When David and I got married, I had to deal with the fact that my dad would not be walking me down the aisle. I know someday if I were to have children, my dad won't be around to be a grandparent for those children. So you're kind of robbed of all of these natural progressions and ebbs and flows of a relationship. And you have to mourn those as they come.
That is incredibly well said. And I think that that's one of those things that until you're experiencing it or until you have somebody spell it out like that, like you have for me, we just don't realize any of this or that many people in our lives are going through these things.
Right. I think a lot of people try to I think a lot of people are pretty quiet because they don't really know what to say to people who are mourning. And I think there is a little bit of people expect you to buckle up, move on, be strong, which I hate.
Understandably.
It is not helpful to say that to a mourning person, to someone whose entire world was turned upside down. But going back to people not knowing what to say when someone is going through grief, a lot of people mistakenly believe that grief is such a personal thing that the grieving people want to keep it to themselves. People are afraid to say or do wrong things, so they say and do nothing, which is possibly the worst thing to do. Coming from experience, grieving people need to talk. We want to talk about the loss. We want to talk about the person. But with that, we also have to accept, as a grieving person, that not everyone in our life will be willing or even able to respond to you in that way. It's hard things to talk about.
I thought it was really interesting, and I really liked the fact that you acknowledged how other people factor into the grief, and that, like, it's all sort of a connected web in that many people respond very differently to somebody who's grieving, and most people mean well, right? Very few people come to somebody who's feeling grief with malice in their heart, but that doesn't always mean that their approach is beneficial or helpful. And while intent being good matters, we're all trying to learn and grow and do better. So hearing what is helpful and what's not, I think can be really powerful and important for anybody, whether you are the grieving person for later on or whether you know somebody who's grieving during the holidays, how to work with them. And I think this is kind of a good place to talk about the difference between sympathy and empathy. Feeling sympathetic for somebody or having sympathy for somebody is like saying, oh, that's too bad that that happened to you. Oh, I feel so bad for you. oh, it's such a shame. It puts them down in a way. You mean well. You feel bad for them, but sympathy creates a power dynamic that most people don't realize, where you are not feeling any of those emotions. You just think it sucks for the other person. So you're giving them your sympathy. Generally, that's not what people are looking for. Most people don't want sympathy. They don't want to be looked down on as somebody who's hurt or broken. Most people just want somebody to listen, to be an active listener, to really hear them, to be present, and to have some empathy. Empathy is about trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Feel at least a bit of what they're feeling so that you can help experience it with them and be there and be present with them. When you're listening to somebody talk about something deep or important, it's much more powerful to be an active listener and to use empathy, not sympathy.
Yeah, luckily, myself and my family, we had a big support system who loved my dad and loved our family. And between myself, my mom, my siblings, we were able to be a support for each other. But just being available to listen, people don't realize how incredibly helpful that is. Because I'm 7 years out from my dad dying, and I still want to talk about him. It's weird at family functions when no one brings him up, or at holidays when we don't talk about the traditions that we lost with him. And like I said, I think it's just because it is an uncomfortable thing. And a lot of people have assumed that with time, you've kind of removed yourself from it. But for the grieving person, it is forever there. You will always be grieving. However, what my therapist says is that grief comes in waves. So there's going to be times where the sea of grief is rocky and the waves come crashing and it's hard to catch a breath. But there's also going to be times where the sea is calm, where maybe it's not going to be this big, pivotal, extreme thing that's going on in your life. And being able to ride those waves, I think, is the only way to process your grief and to give yourself the permission to grieve. Because when you're grieving, the worst kind of grief is your own. It's very personal, and it is absolutely your right to feel that loss and that grief. And the only way out of the grief is through it. So through those storms. Grief is incredibly painful, and grief and loss is one of the few human experiences that we will all experience at some point in life. And we can't avoid it forever. A major key to recovery is to find the courage to go through those storms, to feel the waves of emotion. A quote from Helen Keller is, "The only way to get to the other side is to go through the door." Even though a lot of people might not be able to be available for you in this way, there's still a lot of other options. I went through grief and loss therapy, and that was incredibly helpful. There's support groups, there's counselors, or even just meeting up with someone who has been through a similar experience as you can be incredibly helpful. Effective grief work is not done alone, and I believe in the power of shared experiences, and often others who've been through those deep places can be the most help, and just knowing you're not alone. Grief will come and go, but it doesn't follow a sickness model. It is not you're sick. So say, for an example, you have a sore throat. You have a sore throat for a few days, you take medicine, it gets better, and you don't really think about it. You kind of move on with your life. Grief isn't like that. It doesn't follow that same model. It's always there. It's just going to be bigger and smaller at different times in life. So trust the difficult process and ride the waves. It's also unpredictable. You'll experience a wide variety of feelings and reactions. Something that I notice for me personally, and David can attest to this, is when I'm going through grief, there is a little bit of when the waves of grief are pretty high for me, I tend to be a little edgy, and I can respond in what seems like an angry way. Not that I'm technically angry in the moment, but it can kind of have this like little mindfuck moment of, like I said, David can attest to this, and you can comment on it in a second. A mindfuck moment of, where did this come from? And I'll even feel like, this isn't me. Why am I feeling like this? And 99% of the time, I would say it boils down to the moment that earlier in the day, at some point, I had a moment where I thought about my loss. And it kind of lingers. It just stuck with me for the rest of the day. So, sorry, sometimes I'm angry with you for no reason.
It's okay. It's really interesting hearing the way that you're describing it and piecing it all together, because one of the things that's going through my mind is that while, yes, I can agree with you, sometimes it does manifest that way. And yes, occasionally I've been the one to get the, I don't know, quote unquote, brunt of it. But it also sort of shows that we're all complex. Humans are complex, and the way that our brains work is infinitely complex because many different factors and concepts all work together. If you're feeling grief and loss, that may also ramp up your stress levels for the rest of the day. You may have more anxiety for the rest of the day. You may be quicker to get to overwhelm for the rest of the day. And all of these other topics that we've talked about kind of string together and can accumulate into you maybe not acting a way that you want to act in the moment because of an overwhelm of emotion being caused by, really, like you said, this root cause being grief. Because grief can actually be one of the most pure expressions of love. But it's a very painful expression of love.
Right. Something that I heard that stuck with me is that the one predictable thing about grief is that it's never predictable. It's going to hit you at the worst time very often. Usually in times of high stress, high emotion. That's when it's going to manifest and show up fighting.
I'm a little bit floored right now because you've brought a depth of knowledge and wisdom surrounding grief as a topic that puts mine to shame. I have learned a ton just by having this conversation with you. And you've also shared a lot about your personal experience, and I think that that will resonate for many people listening to this if they've experienced loss and grief, especially at a level similar to yours. But it is also important to remember that since we're all individuals and we're all different, each individual person does experience grief differently. And some people may experience it in such a radically different way that some of this won't resonate from your personal experience. But like you said, grief is unpredictable.
Exactly. It's one of those things that though everyone is going to experience it, everyone is going to experience it differently. Your grief is intimately connected to the relationship that you lost. Everybody's grief response is different, and it comes down to a lot of different factors. To fully interpret our grief response, we need to understand what the relationship brought to your life, and therefore what has been lost from my life. So like I said, my dad walking me down the aisle, that was something that was lost. The fact that he'll be a grandpa to my kids, that is lost. The fact that David never got to meet him. They never got to share cheesy jokes and be obnoxious together. Makes me really sad. It's different for every individual because of those differing circumstances. It can be the duration of the relationship, the type of relationship, the level of happiness in that relationship, and the level of closeness. And there's a million other things that affect your grief response.
So let's talk a little about some coping strategies for grief during the holidays. Because eliminating grief is both not the goal and not possible. Number one, acknowledge your grief. It's okay to feel the pain and to acknowledge it. Don't feel pressure to be happy just because it's the holidays. Sit with your emotions, talk about your loss with people who understand, and allow yourself time to grieve. Acknowledging grief can actually speed up the healing process, according to the American Psychological Association. Grieving individuals who express their emotions tend to experience less prolonged distress. Number 2, when the time is right, and if you feel comfortable, try to create some new traditions. If old traditions are just too painful, it might be helpful to create new ones that honor your grief, but also bring some comfort. This could be a quiet day spent reflecting, or engaging in an activity that brings peace, such as volunteering or spending time in nature. A quote I found by an unknown source is that new traditions are a gift, not to replace the old ones, but to honor them and create space for the future. Number 3 is to practice self-care. Grief takes a toll on both your mental and physical health. Try to engage in some activities that nourish you, whether that's a warm bath, a walk, journaling, or simply just giving yourself some time to rest. And make sure you're taking care of your body so that your mind can heal. The National Institute of Mental Health suggests that self-care practices such as exercise, mindfulness, and adequate rest can help ease symptoms of grief and support emotional recovery. Number 4, seek support. Don't be afraid to lean on others, whether it's friends, family, or a professional. Sometimes it's easier to process grief with someone who can hold space for your emotions without judgment. This is why a therapist can be incredibly helpful, especially one that specializes in grief. Grief shared is grief diminished. While grief may last a lifetime, that doesn't mean that we can't move forward with hope. While your grief may never fully disappear, it evolves over time. It's important to allow yourself grace during the holiday season and to honor your feelings. Holidays may always be bittersweet, but with time, grief can coexist with joy.
So I'm able to talk about this because I've had years of therapy and being able to offload a lot of my grief onto David and onto my siblings, my mom, and also my stepdad-in-law, John. But going back to grief is hard work. It requires a lot of energy, and it takes a toll on us physically and emotionally. I don't think people fully understand that. A problem is when others' expectations of us to pull ourselves together or to get on with our life get in the way, and it doesn't really work like that. And your grief will take longer than most people think. It is finished when it is finished. We need to anticipate the difficult days and know that it's normal, and to give yourself compassion and to take your time with it. A quote from John Donne: "He who has no time to mourn has no time to mend." You have to ride the waves and mourn those losses. Specifically with holiday time losses, I have memories of putting up Christmas decorations with my dad when he was alive, only to be 6 weeks later taking down Christmas decorations without my dad. I had to unwrap the present that I bought for him on my own, and now I use it for camping. It was like a lantern. So Christmas is a really sensitive time for me. A lot of triggers. A lot of people don't realize how much holiday decorations can be a trigger for someone. And there's Christmas lights everywhere. So you can't really avoid it. It's not like, oh, I just don't have to see my triggers. Well, I physically cannot not see my triggers.
Right.
So just be compassionate with yourself and know that it's okay to feel these emotions, and it's okay to let other people in. Something that I've been trying to work on is when I'm having a time where the grief is stronger and I'm reliving some memories and experiences and there's some trauma, I'm trying to make sure that I tell someone, whether that be David or if I'm at something with friends and family. I just try to be honest Not saying that I don't want to have fun, but I might just say, like, yeah, today's just been a little challenging for me. And everyone's usually very understanding. But at the same time, I totally get to trying to keep it to yourself because it is a personal thing. And I think sometimes you don't want to be the person to bring a damper on a mood. And that can be a really challenging thing to work through because then you're just kind of keeping it all stuffed inside. So I'm not saying that you have to go out there and spew all of your trauma for everybody. But I think it's okay to be vulnerable and to be open with someone and say, I'm happy to be here on Christmas, but I've had a lot of emotions today. And maybe just get a hug a little bit deeper, and realize that the waves will come and go.
And actually, one thing that I wanted to touch on, speaking of having the waves come and go, is that sometimes people report actually feeling guilty for when the waves go. Because grief is an expression of loss, it can be easy to fall into feeling shame or guilt for when you're not feeling the grief. Almost like you didn't love the person enough. Which, when you're looking at it from a logical, objective standpoint, is totally unfair to yourself. But you're not choosing to feel that way. It's a natural response that people often have to feeling it, almost like they feel a fear of losing their memory of them if they're not feeling grief.
Absolutely. I would say the first few years, anytime that I felt happy, I almost self-sabotaged, especially when it came to something that I knew my dad would enjoy. Instead of honoring his legacy and sharing those things that bring me joy, that also brought him joy, I would tend to force myself not to feel happiness when it came to those things.
Almost like if he can't feel happiness doing it right now, you shouldn't?
Right, exactly. But I think that that's the best way to honor someone's memory. I can bond and keep that memory of my dad alive through my love of cheeseburgers and camping, grilling out, bonfires, and what I've mentioned in the past is MacGyvering certain situations and coming up with solutions. And I can look up to him as a huge role model and keep his memory alive.
And from what you've told me of him, he's the type of person that would want you to still enjoy all these things, that it would be his greatest wish that you still enjoyed life, and that you didn't beat yourself up for these things, as well as for the rest of your family, too. When someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. Grief is a personal and multifaceted experience. It's especially potent during the holidays. However, by acknowledging your feelings, finding new ways to honor your grief, and practicing self-care, you can navigate the holiday season with more peace.
I just want to end this with saying that there's no correct way to go through grief. But from my experience, going through grief with other people through therapy has been the most healing thing for me, to the point where I can talk about him and talk about my loss. I mean, today's probably a better day than others. There's other days that maybe I wouldn't be as open to being able to discuss this topic. But the fact that I can be on a podcast talking about my dad, Mark, and some of the memories and the losses is a huge step from where I was even 2 years ago. So I'm pretty proud of myself for that. I hope that I'm able to help someone, whether it be someone who's grieving or is preparing for grief, or who knows someone who is grieving. But just know you're not alone. I'm thankful that I was able to share my experiences and speak to you guys about loss and grief. So, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on and being a guest in today's podcast and talking about something that's really not easy to talk about and took a lot of bravery and vulnerability. I know this will help someone. Feel free to reach out to us and share some of your stories surrounding grief if you feel comfortable, and to reach out to others for support if you need it. And of course, make sure that you're taking time to take care of your emotional and mental health during this season. And remember, you are enough, and you deserve true confidence and self-compassion. Thank you for listening to the Sage Solutions podcast. Your time is valuable, and I'm so glad you choose to learn and grow here with me. We'd love to hear your feedback, so click the link in the description and let us know what you think. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more sage advice. One last thing, the legal language. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. No coaching-client relationship is formed. It is not intended as a substitute for the personalized advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. The opinions of guests are their own and may not necessarily reflect the opinions of the podcast.